So I wanted to come on here and read 6 articles that I found really profound this evening, and I think I'm going to start doing this because I think it's the fastest way to get information out, and this is stuff that I really found interesting, and I think you will as well. Today is Sunday, September 25th, and it is 9:05 p.m., and I'm just going to read you some of these articles. The FBI raids a home of a pro-life Christian, guns drawn as family watches in horror on September 24th, 2022. The FBI used a major show of force to arrest pro-life Christian Mark Hawk, 48, with dozens of agents reportedly descending on his home with guns drawn at Hawk's wife and children looked on in horror. Early Friday morning, the FBI arrived at Hawk's residence in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and began pounding on the door despite putting his hands up willingly and cooperating with multiple agents, pointed guns in Mark's face as his family, including 7 children, were forced to watch their dad shackled and taken away. According to family representatives Brian Middleton, who spoke with CBN's FaithWire, Hawk's wife, Ryan Marie, described the shocking scene to LifeSite News, saying her husband was pleading with the agents, saying, "Please, I'm going to open the door, but please, my children are in the home. I have 7 babies in the house," but they just kept pounding and screaming. She added that they had big, huge rifles pointed at Mark and pointed at me and kind of pointed throughout the house. Hawk was released Friday afternoon. This show of force carried out by Biden's ministry or regime against ordinary Americans is the absolute abuse of power, and that stands against the fundamental principles on which our country was founded. Pennsylvania State Senator and Republican nominee Governor Doug Mastriano said in a statement, "This massive display by the FBI, Hawk claims 25 to 30 heavily armed agents were used to haul him in. It raises serious questions as to why so much force was deemed necessary. The FBI raid stems from a minor altercation back in October of 2021 with a volunteer at a Planned Parenthood abortion clinic in Philadelphia. Police were called but declined to pursue the case because of lack of evidence. The volunteer, 72-year-old Bruce Love, who identified as BL on the indictment, is familiar with Hawk as the two have crossed paths at Philadelphia abortion clinic many times previously. The indictment against Hawk claims he assaulted Love only because Love was a volunteer at the abortion clinic. According to Hawk's family representative, that's not what happened. Hawk was at an abortion clinic praying and ministering with his legal right on the sidewalk, not clinic property, when, according to Middleton, it was Love who approached Hawk's 12-year-old son and began unleashing a string of vile comments, cursing the young man. That's when Hawk intervened and eventually pushed Love in order to protect his son, causing Love to fall to the ground. That's when police were called and eventually decided there was a lack of evidence at an assault taking place and declined to pursue any further. Love then filed a criminal complaint against Hawk, but failed to show up to any of the court hearings, prompting the judge to dismiss the case. 6 days after the case was dismissed, Hawk received a target letter from the Department of Justice notifying him he was a subject of a federal grand jury investigation. And according to Middleton, Hawk and his attorneys promptly replied to this notice but never got back to the government until Friday morning when the FBI began pounding on the door. They were absolutely complaint, and there was no reception to their compliance, Middleton said. In a press release, the Department of Justice said claimed Hawk violated the Freedom of Rights Entrance Act. The Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, or FACE Act. Assault is always a serious offense, and under the FACE Act, if the victim is targeted because of the association with a reproductive health care clinic, it is a federal crime, said the U.S. Attorney Romero. Our office and department and Justice Department are committed to protecting crimes which threaten the safety and rights of all individuals. The Department of Justice seems eager to punish those responsible for the wave of recent assaults against pro-life pregnancy centers. With no FBI arrests being made despite 60-plus attacks on crisis pregnancy centers, CBN's FaithWire has reached out to the FBI for comment, but they have not yet heard a response. We will update this, they said. There is a Give Send Go fundraiser for the family, and it is already raised $24,000 of a $30,000 goal. Another article was Russian state TV tells viewers that the nuclear war is likely and everyone dies. This Russian state TV tells viewers that nuclear war is likely and everyone dies. Russian state media are saying nuclear war appears to be a given and everyone will be destroyed if the West pushes us into a corner. One propagandist even suggested Western countries are the nuclear aggressors, when in reality it has only been Vladimir Putin ramping up nuclear rhetoric since the onset of the Ukraine war. Another warned taboos associated with nuclear attacks could be lifted in certain circumstances by Russia. The exchanges among commentators on Russian state TV were captured and translated by Julia Davis, a Russian media analyst. Davis said there is currently palpable frustration in the Russian media that many in the West misunderstood what Putin said. He was threatening the West, not Ukraine, with nuclear strikes. And so droves of propagandists have been sent out to tell the West, push us into a corner and everybody dies. She was referring to Putin's address to the nation on Wednesday, in which he pledged to use all means at which his disposal to protect Russia's territory. This comes amid its allying and so-called special military operation in Ukraine, which has gone catastrophically wrong for Putin this month. In comments translated by Davis, one commenter, Igor, said, in front of a big screen backdrop of missile launches, the West has to understand if certain weapons exist, taboos and limitations on using them could be lifted in certain circumstances. In an impassioned broadside against the West, another propagandist, Olga, suggested Russia is the victim of Western aggression, and we will not allow the destruction of our country. If you're trying to destroy us, you will be destroyed along with us. What should we do to avoid the nuclear war? Or is it already a given? It certainly seems that way. If they don't stop, it will become a reality. Somebody said, who said earlier this week Moscow should have bombed the UK during the Queen's state funeral, added, push us into a corner and everybody will be destroyed. Is that what they're trying to achieve? Putin said it so succinctly, so clearly, we aren't threatening war. We don't want a nuclear winter or a nuclear war, but if you declare that we will be destroyed, we will have to destroy you, said Putin. The culmination of history is approaching. The end of the world may be at hand, and yet Jesus tells us we should not be alarmed. Why? Because we are engraved in the palms of his hands, because we are carried in his arms, because we are the apple of his eye. The time is coming when the world will fall under the spell of the ultimate power-drunk ruler. The Bible calls this ruler the Antichrist, and the world will fear him, and the West will become him. America is currently preparing his way. However, followers of Jesus must remember the Lord's word. See to it that you are not alarmed. We must live faithfully and boldly, knowing that the rise of the Antichrist is coming. In the book of Revelation, John writes of his vision of the end times in Revelation 13. John gives us a detailed description of the Antichrist, and in verse 18, John describes two beasts, one arising from the sea and the other from the land. The first beast represents the Antichrist and the final world ruler who will be destroyed at the second coming of Christ. The second beast is probably a satanically inspired religious leader who supports the political reign of the first beast. Clearly, both beasts are possessed by the spirit of the Antichrist and a spirit that denies that Jesus is the Messiah and the Savior of the world. But there will come a point in history when the Antichrist with a capital A will be revealed. He will arise just prior to the return of Christ. He will literally take control of the entire planet, all of the nations on earth. He will arise at the time of great confusion and chaos in the world. He will arise during conditions of global fear and unrest. He will arise when the world is in political and financial upheaval. Just as the entire world is desperate for order and security, one man will step forth with a message of hope and peace. Daniel 7:8 describes this leader as possessing a mouth that spoke boastfully. I believe this describes a person who is a powerfully charismatic orator, who exudes a winsome charm, and superhumanly brilliant. He will be everything people want a world leader to be. His speeches will strike a chord within the human heart, and people will be drawn to him, and he will unite the world under his rule. For a time, he will deliver exactly what he has promised: peace, prosperity, security, and hope. But once he has the world in the grip, he will remove the mask of the Messiah like peacemaker and reveal himself as the ruthless dictator. Above all, he will deny that Jesus is the only one worthy to be praised. Instead, he will demand that the world worships him. Our world is already being prepared for the Antichrist, and there are countless forces today that would normally oppose each other, yet they have joined forces in the opposition to Jesus. They are united in their denial that Jesus is the only way of salvation. Yet, these opposing groups have one belief in common. They are all united in their total rejection of Jesus' claim to be the divine Son of God and the only way to the Father. Even the Christian world is not even united about Jesus' claim to be the only way of salvation. A 2018 survey conducted by Ligonier Ministries and Lifeway Research found that many Americans who claim to hold evangelical beliefs have shockingly unbiblical notions about Jesus and salvation. The Bible tells us there is no one righteous, not even one, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Romans 3:10. Yet 52% of self-described evangelicals, 52% agree with the statement, most people are basically good. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me in John 14:6. And Peter declared, salvation is found in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given to mankind by which we must be saved. Acts 4:12. Yet 51% of self-described evangelicals believe God accepts the worship of all religions. I won't sugarcoat the truth. I will tell you plainly that being a Christian in the end times will be incredibly difficult. It will mean being hated and persecuted for your faith. But I guarantee you that even if you are hunted down, abused, and killed for your faith in Jesus, it will be worth it. You will have eternal life with Jesus in heaven, and when he returns, you will be full of joy at his appearing while others despair. Only Jesus offers the true security in a collapsing world. Michael Youssef is the founder and the president of Leading the Way with Dr. Michael Youssef, a worldwide ministry that leads the way for people living in spiritual darkness to discover the light of Christ through the creative use of media and on-the-ground ministry teams. I want to read another article, and let me get to it real fast. And then this is about the Palestinian state that we're seeing right now that is trying to be formed in Israel. Could we actually see a Palestinian state be established within the next year or two? Just this week, there have been some new developments that have been absolutely stunning. For the first time in ages, both the President of the United States and the Prime Minister of Israel are openly calling for the creation of a Palestinian state. But just as a couple of years ago it seemed like such a move was extremely unlikely, Donald Trump was in the White House and Benjamin Netanyahu was the Prime Minister of Israel. And it was clear that the Palestinian state would not happen as long as either one of them was in power. Now they are both gone and everything has changed. This is extremely alarming because of the creation of a Palestinian state is something that we've been warning about for years. When it actually happens, it will have enormous implications for the entire globe. During a major speech to the United Nations on Wednesday, Joe Biden told the world that the Palestinians are entitled to their own state. President Joe Biden told the United Nations on Wednesday the Palestinians are entitled to their own state, a day after the U.S. State Department announced $64 million in aid to the UN agency for so-called Palestinian refugees. We will continue to advocate for a lasting negotiation peace between the Jewish and democratic state of Israel and the Palestinian people, Biden said during his address to the UN General Assembly. The United States is committed to Israel's security, full stop. And a negotiated two-state solution remains our best way to ensure Israel's security and prosperity for the future and give the Palestinian the state to which they are entitled, he said. Of course, this isn't the first time that Biden has said something like this. Back in July, he made similar comments during a visit to the West Bank. President Joe Biden reaffirmed his support for a two-state solution for Israel and Palestinians during a visit to the West Bank on Friday, where he sat down with the Palestinian leaders frustrated over lingering Trump-era policies. The Palestinian people, as well as Israeli people, deserve a state of their own that is independent, sovereign, viable, and conscious, he told reporters. Following a meeting with the Palestinian Authority, President Mahmoud Abbas, two states for two people, both of whom have deep and ancient roots in this land, living side by side in peace and security, both states fully respecting the equal rights of the other citizens. The Biden administration is 100% committed to the creation of a Palestinian state, and that has been exceedingly clear for a long time. But up until just recently, Israel did not have a prime minister that was on board with such a move. Unfortunately, Yair Lapid is in charge now, and on Thursday, he also called for the creation of a Palestinian state in front of the UN General Assembly. The future Palestinian state that will exist near Israel must be peaceful and not terror-based, Prime Minister Yair Lapid told the UN General Assembly on Thursday afternoon, just before returning to Israel. If that condition is met, then the best path forward is an agreement with the Palestinians based on two states for two peoples, Lapid said. This is the right thing for Israel's security, for Israel's economy, and for the future of our children. Wow. We always suspected that this is how Lapid felt, and now he is very open about it. During his speech, Lapid actually claimed that a large majority of the Israeli population agrees with him. Despite all of the obstacles, still today a large majority of Israelis support the vision of this two-state solution. I am one of them, he said. Put down your weapons and prove that Hamas and Islamic Jihad is not going to take over the Palestinian state you want to create, and there will be peace, Lapid said. Could that be true? I haven't seen any public opinions or polls on that matter lately, but if most Israelis do want a Palestinian state at this point, that is a very troubling sign. It has always been assumed that a Palestinian state would be the product of long negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but now it is being suggested that Israel could ultimately decide to make a move unilaterally. In other words, one day Israel could just declare that the Palestinians now have a state in areas under their control. According to the Jerusalem Post, a source inside the Israeli government is saying that we will act on our own if they feel that is the best option. If it is necessary, and this is agreed upon with the Americans, we will act on our own, the source said. We do not have to update anyone, and we do not need to ask permission from anyone. Wow. Thankfully, I don't think that Lapid's government will do anything major before the upcoming election in Israel, and it has become clear that his election will essentially be a referendum on the Palestinian state. If Yair Lapid wins the election, things could start to move very rapidly. Let us hope that does not happen, because as I detailed in the Lost Prophecies, the consequences of establishing a Palestinian state would be cataclysmic. We must not be involved in dividing the land of Israel, but that is precisely what the Biden administration intends to do. Biden and his minions are just going to keep pushing this issue, and if Lapid is able to win the election, they will be absolutely thrilled. The election is scheduled for November 1st, 2022, and it's just over a month away. It literally could be an election that changes the course of history, and so let us hope that Lapid does not win. The UN food chief warned Thursday that the world is facing a perfect storm on top of a perfect storm, and urged donors, particularly Gulf nations and billionaires, to give a few days of profits to tackle a crisis with the fertilizer supply right now and prevent worldwide spread food shortages this year and next year. Otherwise, there's going to be chaos all over the world. World Food Program Executive David Beasley said in an Associated Press interview, Beasley said that when he took the helm of the WFP 5.5 years ago, only 80 million people around the world were headed into starvation. And I'm thinking, well, I can put the World Food Program out of business, he said. But climate problems increased that number to 135 million. The COVID-19 pandemic, which began in early 2020, doubled it to 276 million people not knowing where their next meal is coming from. Finally, Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, sparking a war and a food, fertilizer, and energy crisis that had pushed the number to 345 million people. Within that are 50 million people in 45 countries knocking on famine's door. Beasley said, if we don't reach these people, you will have a famine, starvation, destabilization of nations unlike anything we saw in 2007 and 8 and in 11, and you will have mass migrations. We got to respond immediately. Beasley has been meeting the world leaders and speaking at events. This week's General Assembly gathering of leaders to warn about the food crisis. General Assembly President Korosi noted in his opening address Tuesday that we live, it seems, in a permanent state of humanitarian emergency. General Antonio Guterres warned that conflicts and humanitarian crises are spreading, and the funding gap for the UN's humanitarian appeal stands at a $32 billion, the widest gap ever. This year, Beasley said the war shut down grain shipments from Ukraine, a nation that produces enough food to feed 400 million people, and sharply curtailed shipments from Russia, the world's second largest exporter of fertilizer and a major food producer. Beasley said donor fatigue often undermines aid, particularly in countries in ongoing crisis like Haiti. Inflation is also a serious issue, raising prices and hitting poor people who have no coping capacity because of COVID-19 just economically devastated them. Things are starting to get really crazy in Germany. The Germans are dealing with the worst inflation crisis that has ever been seen in the days before the Weimar Republic. And meanwhile, economic activity is starting to shut down all over the nation. Of course, other European countries are facing similar problems. But Germany was supposed to be the economic rock that the rest of Europe could always depend upon. Unfortunately, the decision by the Russians to cut off the flow of gas through the Nord Stream 1 pipeline is hitting Germany extremely hard. If we could just get both sides to agree to end the war in Ukraine, that would greatly help matters, but that simply isn't the case, and it's not going to happen. And in fact, it appears that Vladimir Putin has decided to greatly escalate matters, and the Western powers will inevitably greatly escalate matters in response. What this means is that the economic turmoil that we are witnessing in Europe isn't going anywhere anytime soon. And this week, we got some inflation numbers out of Germany that are so high that it is difficult to believe they are actually real. German producer prices rose in August at the fastest rate since records began in 1949. Data released by the Federal Statistic Office showed today, pointing to the future increase in consumer prices. Producer prices of industrial products rose 45.8% compared to the same month of last year. Compared to July of 22, prices rose 7.9%. Soaring prices on the bank of Russia's war against the Ukraine remain the main driver behind rising prices. If we continue to see monthly increases of around 8% next year, at this time, we could be talking about a yearly jump of close to 100%. Wow. How bad do things have to get before we actually start using the term hyperinflation? Energy prices are the biggest reason why inflation has gotten completely out of control, and the German government has been forced to nationalize a huge natural gas company in order to keep it from going under. The German government is closing in on an agreement to nationalize gas giant Uniper SE as Berlin moves to stave off collapse of the country's entire energy sector. A provisional agreement between the government and Uniper and its main shareholder, Finland's Fortum, has been reached according to people familiar with the situation. While contracts haven't been signed, Berlin is aiming for an announcement later this week. According to the CEO of Uniper, the company has been losing about 100 million euros a day during this crisis. Needless to say, the German government cannot save everyone, and so a lot of firms won't survive this crisis at all. For example, a manufacturer that has been making toilet paper for Germans for nearly 100 years is now headed into insolvency. Hackel has been a German household name since 1928, but the Dusseldorf-based toilet manufacturing said it took this summer's gas prices shock to drive it to insolvency. Sadly, this is just the beginning. According to the German central bank, the nation is moving into a broad-based and prolonged decline in economic output. Economic activity may pull back somewhat this quarter and shrink markedly in the autumn and winter months, the central bank said, adding that it didn't forecast this adverse scenario in a June report. Bundesbank continued, there are mounting signs of a recession in the German economy in the sense of a clear, broad-based and prolonged decline in the economic output. It said a contradiction is expected in the third quarter with the deeper declines in economic activity in the fourth. Higher inflation and uncertainty with regard to energy supply and its cost affects not only the gas and electricity intensive industry and its exports and businesses and investments, but also private consumption and service providers depend on it, the central bank said. You can refer to such a scenario as a recession or a depression if it makes you feel better. I call it an economics collapse. The U.S. economy will soon be experiencing immense turmoil as well. According to billionaire Barry Sternlicht, the Fed's exceedingly foolish policies are pushing us toward a serious recession. In an interview with CNBC's Squawk Box on Thursday, Barry Sternlicht, the chairman and CEO of Starwood Capital, said he believes that Americans are facing a major recession if the Federal Reserve proceeds with several more rate hikes as a means of curbing inflation, which is reportedly the central bank's plan. The economy is breaking hard, Streichlich told the financial news outlet. According to the Daily Caller, if the Fed keeps this up, they are going to have a serious recession and people will lose their jobs. He is right on target, but instead of just saying people will lose their jobs, he should have said and noted that lots of people are already being laid off. This is something that I have been documenting on my website for quite some time, and this week we learned that Gap has decided to lay off hundreds of corporate workers. Gap Inc. is cutting about 500 corporate jobs as the clothing retailer struggles with declining sales. The job cuts, which include open positions, will be primarily at Gap's offices in San Francisco, New York, and Asia, and hit various departments, a representative for the retailer confirmed Tuesday. The moves were first reported by the Wall Street Journal. Ouch. In this environment, very few workers are truly safe. At this point, even the entertainment industry is letting lots of people go. The struggling TV and film industry continues to run face first into bad news. This week it was reported that Warner Brothers Discovery was firing 100 TV ad salespeople at the same time that Paramount has considered ending offering Showtime as a standalone service, Bloomberg reported. Netflix followed suit with their own layoffs. The report says the company has reportedly let go of hundreds of employees and abandoned some of its office spaces. At the same time, the firm's stock prices had collapsed and fallen more than 60% from its all-time highs. Back in 2008 and 2009, millions of Americans lost their jobs. Will we see something similar in the months ahead? And just like during the Great Recession, the housing market is really starting to slow down. In fact, we just learned that home builder confidence has now fallen for 9 months in a row. The confidence of builders of single-family homes fell again in September, the 9th month in a row of declines, as the combination of elevated interest rates, persistent building materials, supply chain disruptions, and home prices continue to take a toll on affordability, the NAHB report said. With today's index value of 46, the NAHB Wells Fargo Housing Market Index is now below where it had been in May of 2006 on the way down to the housing burst. This time around, it won't be just a few areas of the planet that suffer. At this moment, we are literally witnessing economic implosions all over the planet. And at the stage is being set for an immensely painful 2023. The one thing that could really turn things around would be peace. Unfortunately, global leaders on both sides seem absolutely determined to drag us into the type of cataclysmic global conflict that I have been warning about for years. So there isn't going to be peace, and that means that things are going to get really bad in 2023 and beyond. But I also believe that we are put at this specific moment in history for a reason. It is when times are the darkest that the greatest good can be done. And that is something that we will all need to remember during this very dark time in front of us.